So one of the things I love in the book is your active language. You talk about fight to flourish. You talk about, use words, fight, engage, suit up, engage in the struggle, find your grit, shake up the freshness, keep your guard up, stir up the sweetness, show up and stand out. All of these things point to us doing something. So when we look at walking through grief and pain and struggle, they require action on our part. Why?
Gosh, that's so good. It's a good question. I think so often, at least in my upbringing, a lot of like phrases were like, let go and let God, and like, don't try to make things happen. God will, which I do. I honestly believe both those things. And I think that God is ultimately in control, and he's the one, like the Bible says, who raises up, and he's the one who brings low. Like, exaltation comes from the Lord. Like, he's in control ultimately. But there's also this, and even with salvation, and God's the one that freely gives it. It's nothing that we work for. We didn't work hard to get where we're at. We just believed and received that Jesus is the one who lived and died and rose again, and he's our salvation. And so there's even that tension. I feel like a lot of my book does have that tension where it's like the good and the hard, and not working for salvation, but working really hard to fight for honor and to fight to live this kind of flourishing life that God's called us to live. And so I just see how the Bible, I mean, a lot of those words and images that you were just talking about come straight from the Bible, where in Hebrews, he's talking about running this race. And I don't know if anyone's run before, but that's actually really hard, and I do not enjoy it personally. So I know what it does for my full body workout is amazing, but there is work that goes into running, and running to win. And I think that's like kind of a next level of living this life intently and focused on what God has for us to do and how we can fight to flourish in this life, is just that added intensity of running to win. And I kind of talk about it a little bit, but there's a difference between running, and I have a friend who trail runs, and it's like enjoying the scenery and kind of running. And obviously you're sweating and getting a good workout, but it's not like you're on a track and you are running and you're trying to get rid of seconds and shedding off anything that's holding you back, and you're leaning in and you're like posturing your head forward so you can be the first one to run through the finish line. And I think there's just that added intensity where this life is such a fight. And for me personally, I think that flourishing can be so unrelatable at times. That the word is so beautiful, and I want it to describe my life, but I think so often it seems so unrelatable, especially when we feel like we're failing. But when I point to is that that's exactly it. I think sometimes our definition of what flourishing is just seems so like, oh, well, in heaven I'll be flourishing, and maybe when I'm older and wiser. Or I mean, that's even like in the process of writing this book, like I tried to quit multiple times because it was so difficult. I have 4 little kids, and leading a church with my husband, and it was not easy, but just the idea of fighting forward and fighting through, and knowing that when we say yes to Jesus and we say, God, I believe you, and I know that I can't save myself and I can't go to heaven without you, that's the start of this process called sanctification. And basically that's this whole life from now forward, where the Bible talks about us being made more and more and more like Jesus. So it's this very arduous, like long process. And going back to what we said earlier of just that long obedience in the same direction, there's this flourishing that we're meant to take place, becoming more like Jesus. But I think so often the connection of where I'm at now and what that looks like. Yes, when I see him face to face, I'll be perfectly pure in his presence, and I won't be dealing with struggles, and I won't be dealing with grief, and there's no more tears and no more pain. But what about from here until then? And what does that even look like to flourish as a mom and to flourish as a wife and as a leader and a teacher and a student? Like, what does that even mean? And I just believe that all these action words that you mentioned is part of just this fighting forward and fighting to not be the lazy person that I so naturally am, but to fight in my marriage, to fight to respect and honor Levi, and to think outside of myself, and to not think so selfishly, but to think of him more than myself. And honestly, it's just that kind of permeates into every area of my life personally.